Networking Award of Excellence by his peers, and he runs a company called Kintish Online Networking Skills. I'm delighted to welcome Will Kintish. Hi, Will.
Hi, Alec. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, delighted. You know, I'm going to take you back those years, back to school times. What was that like? Had you a plan?
A plan in my whole life, Alec, has been guided by two people, and I wasn't one of them. I'm probably one of the older people on your show. I'm 72 years old, and at 16 years old, in May 1964, can you imagine May 1964? No internet, no mobile phones, no laptops. It was pen and paper. It was pounds, shillings and pence. It was a world so different, we can't imagine. But I was 16 years old, Alec, and my mother died from cancer. Wow. Had she had the same cancer today, she probably would have been cured because of the scientific advancement we've had in all those years. But no, she died. I was 16. When I took my GCSEs, I didn't do very well. Right. And the headmaster called me into his study and he said, Kintish, because that's how they called you in those days, you're not academically suitable for the sixth form. I think you ought to go and get a job. What am I going to do, sir? I said. He said, the only thing you're quite good at is to go and be an accountant.
An accountant?
That was it. I didn't know what an accountant was. And I sort of walked out of there a bit shell-shocked. And my auntie, who'd brought me to school in the car because we didn't have a car, we couldn't afford a car. Auntie Letty, when I said to her, Mr. Hanforth told me to go and be an accountant, her face lit up and she said, oh, you can go and work for your Uncle Jerry. And a week later, I was working for my Uncle Jerry. I was adding up clients' books. And that was the start of my career.
Wow. And were you any good as an accountant?
I've got to tell you, when it came to being technical, no, I'm not a very clever person at all. I've never been clever. I've never been academic. I've never been intellectual. My skill that I've realized now is with people. I was always the greatest client getter and the greatest client keeper. But when it came to actually doing the technical work, I got by. And when I wasn't sure what I did, I went to all my partners when I became a partner, and they helped me out with the technical stuff because they weren't great at getting clients. But my goodness, I was always the best one. In the professionals, Alex, they have finders, minders, and grinders.
All right.
And I was always the finder and often the minder. In other words, the manager, somebody who made sure he kept the clients. And the grinders were the ones who did the work. And every business needs all of those. But if there's no finders, guess what? You don't need the other people.
That's interesting because, I mean, having left school at that sort of age, you must have qualified very young. And so did you spend long with Uncle Jerry in the business?
Oh, no, Uncle Jerry was a horrible man. He really was a terrible, terrible fellow. I left a year later. In fact, I was going out with this girl now to whom I've been married 50 years in December. And I was complaining about Uncle Jerry. And she said, well, why don't you go and talk to my father's accountant? And I did. I went to see Mr. Clark and I did my training contract with him for 5 years. And at the age of 22, I was a qualified accountant and I had wonderful, wonderful training from Mr. Clark.
I've found it interesting when we were just talking earlier, you mentioned your ability to sort of interact with people. Tell us a bit more about that and how it moved you through your career.
I think it's just something in my DNA. I've always got on with people. People generally have liked me. I've never thought about it a lot until the mid-70s. I went when I was a partner in my accountancy firm by then, and I went on a training course run by an organization called Dale Carnegie, who wrote that very famous book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. And that really helped me I would say formulate what I was good at. I was just thought I was good at building relationships, but going on that course and reading the book really made me understand what it takes to be a good parent, a good husband, a good employer, a good colleague, a good accountant even. Because at the end of the day, Alec, you think about business. Your program is called The Business Expert. What is business? Business is just a bunch of people who have to communicate and get on with each other.
Yes.
And that's, for me, I became a trainer with Dale Carnegie in the late 90s.
All right.
And that's perhaps what got me out of accountancy to do what I'm doing now, which is set up my new career in the year 2000.
What sort of drew you towards Dale Carnegie? I mean, obviously a household name in the world of business, but what initially drew you towards his program?
Alec, do you believe in fate?
Yes, I
I'm
do.
a great believer in fate. I was having lunch one day with an accountancy client of mine in the 80s, and we were having lunch and he handed me the menu and he said, test me. I said, what do you mean test me? He said, well, there are 21 items on that menu. He said, ask me about number 18 or number 4. And I did. And he got them all. I said, how did you learn that? He said, well, I went on this management course run by an organization by Dale Carnegie, and I think you'll enjoy it. And that was it again. There was a third party telling me what to do, but it was fate. I went on the course. I loved it so much that 10 years later, I became a trainer.
And what do you think? I mean, obviously, we're not going to try and cover the whole of the Dale Carnegie course, but what do you think was the sort of essence that really drew you in?
I'll give you just one or two of his very, very famous quotes. The most interesting people we ever meet are those who are most interested in us.
That's true.
His number one rule is don't criticize, condemn, or complain, which I've tried to learn over the years. I'm sure you'll agree with me, Alec. I don't know what you're like with names, but most people say they're absolutely rubbish with names. They hear a name at an event and it just goes over their head. And here's another quote from Dale Carnegie, which is absolutely timeless. A person's name is to that person the sweetest and most important sound in any language. Now, let me challenge you. I bet you get called Alex as often as you get called Alec. Is that right?
I do, and you'll see my branding has the letter C in red on it.
Right, well, let me help you here. When you next go to an event, or being well, when we come out of social distancing, rather than saying, hello, my name's Alec Drew, and people don't hear it. They think they heard Alex. What I want you to do in future, say, hello there, very clearly and slowly. Hello, my name is Alec, Alec Drew, and do your best to help them get your name right. Because very often people don't hear the name because people aren't clear in the way they say it. So I introduce myself as, hello, my name is Will, pause, Will Kintish, and hopefully most of the time they get it.
That's a great tip. Yeah, I'm sure our listeners will benefit from that one.
So, and when it comes to, oh, I've forgotten people's names, it's nothing to do with our memory, Alec. It's all to do with our listening. We're so worried about creating that fabulous first impression that we're missing that key part, going back to Dale Carnegie, about people's names. Because when we get people's names and we remember people's names, people think of us as really nice people. And that's true. What it's all about.
They certainly do.
Names are critical.
Yeah, getting back to that, I mean, accountancy was going to come to an end for you at some stage. How did that all sort of pan out?
So in 1999, I'd been at my accountancy firm then for 27 years. We decided there was no future in the size of our firm. We were too big to be little, too little to be big. And we met a national firm in Manchester, where I live. And they basically took us over. And I became a partner in the bigger firm, but I already told them that I was training as a trainer for a hobby in the evenings, earning a few bob, not very much. And a year later, in the year 2000, they called me in and said, Will, we know you're not happy here. We'll buy your clients off you, and you can then set up your own training business. So I went home to my wife and I said, what do you think? Well, at the time I was 52 years old, and as ever, she's always supported me. And we decided, we talked about it. I was getting enough money to cover everything for the next 2 or 3 years. And we thought, well, if it doesn't work out, I can always go back to being an accountant. The rest, as they say, is history. So in the last 20 years, Alec, being an ex-accountant, I'm a bit sad, really. I keep a record of statistics. I've presented to nearly 2,500 people, 2,500 times, 2,500 different audiences. I presented to about 125,000 people. And most of that time in the last 20 years is how to become a confident and effective networker. And I hope you'll agree with me here that to be a success in business, apart from being technically good at the job, you also have to be good with the people. And that's what networking is all about.
And that's fantastic. And that's going to lead us on for this conversation now, because I think networking has such a strange name out there, and so many sort of versions of it have been put out. I'm delighted to be able to speak to an expert on the topic and maybe clear up some of that for our listeners.
Well, I've got to tell you, Alec, I'm a bit of a con man, really. You know why?
Yeah.
Because you, me, all our listeners, and in fact, everybody in the world, we network from the age of 2, whether we like it or not. And this is where people don't understand it. You've said it already. The minute they hear the word, they think selling, lack of confidence. What am I going to say? What am I going to do? But you know what? Networking is just talking to people. Networking is building relationships, which we do from the age of 2 years old. And what I do in my training and my conference speaking is I have to explain the basics to them. That you walk into a room at a conference, when we can go back to doing that, excuse me, you go up to somebody and you say, hello, can I introduce myself? And the relationship starts. And here is a tip about confidence. If you're going to an event and you probably don't, and you think you don't know many people, get there early. I always plan my diary that I get there early. Even me, who's a great networker, I hate walking into a room, which is what I call, I've lost the word, which I call already formed. Mature, that's the word. Thank you, that's the word. If you go to an event and you hardly know anybody and you get there 15 minutes late and there's 50 people in the room and they're all chatting away, that's a horrible sight to see. So why put yourself through the pain and heartache of doing it? Organize your day that you get there early. If it's a hosted event, the host will welcome you and perhaps introduce you to another fellow guest. Or if it's not, you just go up to somebody probably standing on their own in the corner and off you go.
And people seem to find it so strange to go up and talk to a stranger. They do it in pubs all the time, but for some strange reason at business events seem to struggle.
I don't know why. Well, I do know why, Alec. Are you ready for this? I do know why. It's our mummy's fault. What did our mummy tell us about talking to strangers? I think that's what it is. And I say to my audiences, you know, that was good advice at the age of 5, but now you're 25 or more. That's what you've got to do. And it's all about fear of rejection. Will anyone talk to me? And I say, please, I don't care whether anyone talks to you. Your job is to go and talk to them. You get there reasonably early and you go up to somebody, or if there are people there who you already know, go and talk to them first. But not to the exclusion of spending the whole evening, because that's what a lot of people do. They see somebody they know and say, oh, thank goodness for that. And they go up to that person, they spend the whole time talking to them, and that's a waste of time. Don't get me wrong, reinforcing relationships is very important, but don't spend the whole time with them. Move on after you've spent, I don't know, 10 minutes or so, and go and find new people to talk to.
I always find it quite interesting at events, particularly when they're hosted by, say, a bank or some large organization where people are wearing uniforms. You'll often see them all huddled in the corner chatting to one another.
You're absolutely right. And over the years, I've run lots of courses called How to Host a Successful and Effective Event, because the bosses of these organizations realize that that's exactly what happens. In one corner, there are the hosts, and in the other corner, there are the guests. But again, it's back to the same thing. People are nervous about going up to talking to their guests. I mean, how crazy is that? It's like me and my wife inviting friends and family into our home and going sitting in the other room watching the television. It's just crazy. So I suppose I've had a wonderful living for the last 20 years pointing out the obvious to people. And that's why I called myself a bit of a con man at the beginning. I'm not really, but if you think about it, I'm teaching people how to talk to each other. And hopefully that has become a very valuable lesson for the thousands of people that have been in my audiences.
For people who want to find out more, Will, have you a web address that you can steer them towards?
I do. I have two interesting sites. I have Kintish, KINTISH.co.uk. And I also have my YouTube channel. There's loads of stuff on there. I mean, if somebody can be bothered going all over the internet, Alec, they can have all my stuff for nothing. Hopefully they won't. They'll pay me something one day. But yeah, if you go onto the YouTube channel, just type in Kintish. There's loads of stuff on there.
Can I just continue the topic of networking? Because I think it's quite interesting that we see things like speed networking and all sorts of strange offerings from organizations. I'm sure you have some comment about those.
Well, over the years, I've run lots of speed networking events, but unlike a lot of them where they give you 2 minutes to talk to somebody, I think that's an absolute load of rubbish. Whenever I run a speed networking event for a client, I make sure that the two people sitting opposite each other have at least 10 minutes. 10 minutes. So you have 5 minutes sharing your knowledge, the other person has 5 minutes sharing that, and then you can see whether there is any basis for a further conversation. But for 2 minutes, no. But let's say this, Ali, you talk about different ways of networking. Needless to say, since the middle of March this year, guess what? We haven't been able to do any physical networking, have we? So it's all about online networking. But you know what? Apart from the physical shaking hands or giving somebody a hug if you know them well enough, we can network just as well online. Because I've not said this yet. Networking is building relationships. And the 3 key steps to building relationships is know, K-N-O-W, know, like, and trust. Well, guess what? Online, we can get to know people. We can build rapport through the camera, and we can start to trust each other by being reliable. So my big, and I've been doing quite a bit of training on this, but my big piece of advice I'm giving to everybody is, in lockdown, I would rather you spent a lot more time reinforcing, reinvigorating, and re-energizing relationships with people from the past, old clients, even clients who didn't want your services in the past. Just go back to them, see how they're getting on, see how they're coping with COVID. Going back to all your network, going back through your LinkedIn level 1 connections, rather than starting to build new relationships online. Because I do believe that trying to build a new relationship online without actually being in the same physical space, I think is quite difficult. So while we're in the situation we're in, just go back through your little black book of contacts, through your Rotodecks that we used to have in those days, or our CRM system, customer relationship management system, or as I say, through our LinkedIn connections and get in touch with those people rather than starting new relationships.
You mentioned some of the people possibly that we had lost contact with. Have you any suggestions around how you break the ice with these to get back in contact with them?
Yes, this is a bit quaint and old-fashioned, this, Alec. Are you ready for this?
Go on.
Some of our younger listeners might not understand it. Pick up the phone. Do you remember the phone, Alec? You can actually talk into it. Pick up the phone and talk to people. Hi, Alec, it's Will Kintish here. I'm really embarrassed to tell you we've not spoken for some time, but I saw your name on LinkedIn or I saw your name on Facebook. I'm just phoning to see how you're getting on, how you're coping with everything. And if you remember the name of the dog or you remember the name of the husband, the wife, the kids, how are the kids getting on? Your children must have grown up by now. And off we go. And the conversation restarts, even if you haven't spoken to them for 5 years.
I mean, obviously you said this is not about a selling exercise. So people are possibly going to think to themselves, why is Will on to me now?
That's a great question. Great thought. No, it's just a case of reminding people you're alive and well. I mean, what you do hope, Alec, is that you ask them all about them, how they're getting on, and you do hope they will then come back and ask you how you're getting on. And at that point, you don't need to sell, but if they're showing interest in you, you can say to them, well, actually, I've had to change my whole way of doing business, my modus operandi. Obviously, I can't go to conferences, but I am doing some live online training. But I'm really glad you've mentioned that. So many people, when they go to business events, they do not understand the difference between networking, i.e. relationship building, and selling. And that is something I have to try and drill into people. Whatever you do, don't start selling at all. You don't need to sell. At the end of the day, business will only happen, Alex, with the following condition. If you have a product or service and you meet somebody who has a need or a want for that product or service and they like you, it's then and only then will business happen. So you don't need to sell. All you need to do is ask questions and find out what their challenges are. And if your expertise matches their challenge, business will happen.
And a lot of people you'll find at networking events, and I don't have to tell you, but I'm sure my listeners will be well familiar with this, suddenly switch off as soon as they hear somebody's not that interested in what they're talking about.
Well, I have, this perhaps might be about moving on at an event. I think you might have been alluding to that. You get into a conversation with somebody and you can see that they're not interested in you at all. Well, I talk about parking and dumping people. How do we get rid of people in a courteous and polite way? Well, if they've been rude to you, in other words, they've been looking round, looking over your shoulder, then I think you can dump them. In other words, I would say to you, well, Alex, it's nice to have met you. Enjoy the rest of the event and off you go. But if you've been courteous and polite to me and I've realized you don't know anybody, just walking off, I think, leaves a bad taste in that other person's mouth. So what I will do, I will offer you an option. Alec, I'm going for a drink. Would you like to join me? Or if I've seen my friend Sean over there, I say, can I introduce you to Sean? And I will go and park you on Sean and then perhaps leave you to it. But if I don't know anybody at the event, are you ready for this? Yep. I will suggest that we go hunting in pairs. I'll say, Alec, shall we go and meet some other people? We go and look for a group of people who are in an open format. They're not closed, they're standing open. And we go over to them and I say, hello, everyone, please may we join you? And then the conversation starts all over again. And if I want to get rid of you, Alec, I'll leave you in that group and I'll go off and meet somebody else.
Fantastic. It's a fantastic tip. You mentioned the website earlier, which again for our listeners is?
Kintish, Kintish, kintish.co.uk.
And I believe you've also written a book around this topic as well.
Yes, 5 years ago, one of the world's biggest publishing companies, Pearson Books, found me out of the blue and said, "Will you write a book for me?" I said, "Delighted to. Are you going to pay me in advance?" Cheeky, I said. And they actually said yes. They paid me a nice advance, which I've not actually paid off, because I think I've sold about 5,000 books. It's called Business Networking, the Survival Guide: How to Make Networking Less About Stress and More About Success. It's got a lovely yellow front on it, and I am going to sell now. It's available on Amazon. Well, I tell you this, Alec, after Amazon have taken their cut and Pearson have taken their cut, I probably get about 20p per book. So I've got to tell you, I ain't making a lot of money out of that bit of promotion. But if people want to learn how to work a room, how to understand the logistics, how to understand about becoming likable, then that is the book to read.
I suppose as we're kind of coming into the last few minutes of the show, tell me about the online side of this, because obviously you've had to rethink this out as we're not getting that face-to-face physical contact. Well,
I do have, I've developed a suite of 3 courses. One is a mini workshop, how to become a successful networker online. Another one, which is a half-day workshop, how to become a successful networker online. And a third one, which unfortunately may become very popular, and I repeat, unfortunately, how to network your way into a job. I can't, as I say to everybody, I cannot guarantee you'll get a job, but what I can guarantee, if you listen to my words, is I can guarantee that you've got a heck of a better chance of getting a job than perhaps you wouldn't have had before. But talking about online, in January of this year, I launched my online learning program. I didn't have a crystal ball, Alec. I didn't know this was going to happen to us, but I've got an online learning program, which last month, of course, again, I've had to totally redesign to incorporate online networking as well as face-to-face networking.
Well, you were saying to me, do you believe in fate? So obviously fate was playing into your hands with your online course.
Absolutely. My whole life has been ruled by other people. I mean, I joke about being a bad accountant, but many of my clients will tell you, "Oh, I loved him. He was fun, and he made a lot of difference to my life." But I think it was all about the relationship. Alec, you know this cliche. People buy people before they buy the product or service. And that's what I have to explain to my audiences, because I do lots of work in universities and business schools, in accountancy firms and law firms. And I have to say to them, if you want to be really successful, you can't just be great at the technical aspects of the job. People have got to like you. So I work with researchers and professors and really, really clever academics. And with their knowledge, they have been told by their universities, and I hate this Americanism, Alec, you've got to monetize your ideas. And the only way you can monetize your ideas is to get into business and meet business people. And that means being a good networker.
Fantastic. And just as we wrap up the show, again, what I'd like you to do is maybe tell our listeners your website, and I think also the YouTube, because I think so many of them would love to be able to go onto the YouTube and see that. And also mention the book. So there we go, 3 plugs in one go, and you've got 20 seconds, Will.
Kintish, KINTISH.co.uk. My YouTube channel, which again is Kintish, and my book is called Business Network, the Survival Guide.